Hey,
there we are.
I totally cut you off. Sorry, Adam.
Did you know I was just making sound effects? You know that the ends. Yeah, no, pure sound effects. You did not cut me off at all.
Nice.
I promise you. How's it going?
Oh, it's good. It's good. It's been a week so far, right? I mean, yesterday
It's only Tuesday.
I know. Yesterday was just that big. We did our whole Container Day 0 event for KubeCon, and man, that was quite an event. It was all day of talking about containers and talking about Kubernetes, and we had a lot of launches.
Yes.
So some stuff was sort of unveiled for the first time. I think that was pretty cool. I don't know what's been going on with you.
Oh, same old stuff here. It's just funny how you say it's been a week. It really, I swear, yesterday felt like a full week's worth of work just wrapped into a day. And granted, it was like 3 containers from the couch shows, but we had some really cool announcements yesterday, and Bottlerocket being one of them, which I guess, context for today, we're going to be unboxing Bottlerocket. But I think, talking about container-specific operating systems feels really nice. And I'm really excited to hear what Justin's going to, first of all, what he has to say about Bottlerocket, but of course the live demo. And of course, is it fair to say, Justin, there's going to be live props today?
There will be a few. Yeah. We always try to give that visual aid if it's going to help someone.
I'm getting a subtle prop just with the T-shirt that he's wearing.
Right.
I mean,
throwback
container-based
to
OS. Exactly. So that was my first container operating system, and frankly, using CoreOS kind of solidified the whole concept of putting things in containers for me. There's no longer, what's on the OS versus what should I put in a container. The answer was put it in a container. Put it all in containers. Strip down the operating system.
It really proved that you don't need a package manager, right? Inside the OS at least, right? You need a container runtime and some controls, and you can do a lot with that.
Totally.
Yes.
Exactly. So,
and even the background here with SpaceX launched more rockets. I'm going in with the whole theme, right? It's just like container OSs and rockets. We're trying to get the whole thing just as much themed out as we can.
I like
That's
it.
so good. Techie Stories is back, one of our regulars. Hey, Techie Stories, and she was a big fan of the Bottlerocket announcement as well.
She loves talking about security, and I think there's some inherent security that you get from an operating system like Bottlerocket. So,
for sure.
I can definitely see why that's super popular.
I just want to do a quick poll of the group. How many CoreOS shirts do you have? I think I have 4.
I just have one. I wish I had more because they are super soft.
The most comfortable shirts ever.
They have aged so well. So
okay, I win.
Yeah, you do. Although the CoreOS Fest was they only had one, and they actually had special invites for they sent a box with a shirt in it. It was limited edition. I was like, this is amazing. Making someone feel special around hey, we want you to come to this thing. I still had to pay for a ticket, but hey, here's a gift for a shirt. Before you come, it was actually really cool because I was like, I already knew about CoreOS Fest, and I met a lot of great people there. They had a lot of good talks just around at that time, it was right around that, Tectonic was coming out, Kubernetes shift for CoreOS is like being a product and a focus was really fascinating. But it was a great time just to be like part of that group of like, how do we make operating systems better and more secure and easier in a lot of cases, right? Like the amount of tuning and things you had to do with operating systems historically has been so much to get to this point. And now it's like, hey, you know what? Like, what if that is boring? And what if we just, you can control it different ways and upgrade it and do these things in a different way.
Right. Jesse says he has 3, and I have to ask the question, why do you have any, Jesse? I think you were working at for Solaris at the time, working on Solaris.
I think he has like 100 Solaris polo shirts. Love you, Jesse.
Yes.
Just teasing.
You're forgiven.
Hey, you started it, and you egged me on. Anyways, Brent, you were going to say something, and I interrupted you earlier, so I don't know if you remember that thought.
I think I may have been thinking back to where I got my CoreOS shirt, and I think it was at like one of the first Mesos conferences, and CoreOS was one of the exhibitors, and that was when I was first introduced to CoreOS, and like I said, it just kind of all clicked. So it's cool.
And so I was just looking at Twitter, and Matthew Wilson had mentioned it's Bottlerocket, not AWS Bottlerocket. It's Bottlerocket. So
yeah, that's fair.
Which I think we said, but I was just saying for further clarification. Anyways, let's get into it, huh? What do you say?
Let's do it.
Sure.
Right.
Are there any other announcements or anything else we want? I mean, like KubeCon's going on right now. Like I've been trying to keep up and connect with people, but it's been quite the whirlwind of just reading news and everything else.
And European time is hard from, especially from the West Coast. So have you seen anything from KubeCon that, is notable?
I went into the virtual space. I went through the expo hall a little bit, and I kind of looked at the listing of talks, but basically almost everything I'm just like, I might have to do this later, which is good. You miss out on that like shared experience of, like we all learned it together at the same time, but there's also a lot of great things that it's, even more inclusion, even though it's a EU conference. Hey, guess what? Like time zones are hard, and I need to sleep at some point. So being able to catch up with that later in the week or next week, and still be able to get all the information from the lineup for people talking is just amazing. So there's a lot I really want to learn about, but at the same time, it's just I got other things. So
yes,
totally.
So yes, glad that we mentioned it. I just saw it and I felt like it was important, so I felt like I had to mention it.
That's impressive, though, that you're like on Twitter and this at the same time.
I have like the full control center here. It's unbelievable.
Slack open too.
I do, but that one's hidden. So at least I have
send him a message. We'll see if we hear the little the chime that it does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not chime though. We can't have that open at the same time.
Right.
No.
You did change your. Go ahead.
By the way, Tanju, hey, back to you, and Stitchy E. Welcome back. We don't want to miss saying hey to our regulars. So,
yes,
awesome.
Let's do it.
So, should we dive into your screen?
Let me switch that real fast to the. I'm going to show just real fast because I actually have to start. I want to show this with an EKS cluster, so I want to just get that started so that it's not. If there is a problem or something else, we can switch over to it. So here's just a really quick EKS control. Or cuddle or whatever you want to say, can take a config file and you can tell it basically all the specs. Instead of sending flags to everything, you can say, here's what I want, just do this. So this is, I just wanted to show this off real fast. Don't memorize or whatever. They have great examples. But the main things are, I'm calling my cluster Rocket. It's going to be a Kubernetes 1.17. And then just some node groups, what's instance type. Here's my AMI family with the actual ID that I want to use. And then zone, and then I have some other things about IAM permissions, right, so that I can SSH or SSM to those instances, and they can access the EKS control plane, everything else. So I basically just have 2 of those in here with a public key set, so I can SSH into it. So I wanted to show that before I actually just quickly run the command and write out a config file. So that'll run in the background.
Perfect.
And then
I have questions.
Yeah.
So back on your config, I noticed that you're building 2 node groups, one per availability zone. That's less of a question and more of a, wow, that's impressive. Next level stuff there. Tell the rest of the audience why you might do that.
I have a whole blog post that's prepped for it, which isn't out yet. But yes, the main reasons you might want to do that is if you're using EBS volumes or any service that is region or availability zone like constrained. So EFS can go across the region to any AZ, but things like EBS volumes and there's a couple other small things that, like, if you're using them, you might schedule a pod, and if you create an EBS volume, it'll map into that pod. Great. If that node goes away or the pod gets rescheduled or deleted and recreated, if a pod goes into a different AZ, you won't be able to map that EBS volume into the pod. And so controlling that, how they actually, where your AZs are, you can scale up and scale down each one independently. There are tons of trade-offs with both scenarios. It's harder to kind of manage multiple auto-scaling groups. It's easier if it's just one big one, but if you have one big one, you might get pods that just land randomly in an AZ, and Kubernetes isn't actually aware of which services only work per AZ. There is some work on making topology aware scheduling, and especially for network traffic, so you don't have cross AZ network, and there's all these things that are kind of coming and they're being worked on. But EBS volumes is a good example of, if you're using them and you have one auto scaling group that spans AZs, it might cause some problems for you with pods that can't schedule and or be rescheduled. So
so if you saw that, noticed it, it's definitely advanced level. It's not that it's necessarily harder, but it is something that you would then have to sort of make adjustments elsewhere as well about how you deploy your pods. So
that was a good catch, and there's always trade-offs. So you're going to manage it at some level. If you don't have to use any AZ constrained service inside Kubernetes cluster, great. Make one big ASG, put it in the region, and you're good. Like, you won't have those constraints. But there's a lot of workloads that might require an EBS volume, and so I show it off sometimes.
So like two examples of when you might not need that would be, one, you have no stateful containers. You're doing completely stateless. So that's definitely how you should start anyway. Your first container that you deploy should probably be stateless. And then two, you might be doing stateful, but you're doing it with backing from something like EFS instead of EBS. And if you do that, then EFS allows for cross AZ access. So you get the same data no matter what availability zone you're in. And
or you store all your state in Route 53, and you have 100% SLA, and it's global, and it's just, that's a thing.
It's the best database there is. So I wanted to, while we're waiting, give a couple more shout outs. Ayush, hey, back to you. And notice, by the way, he's coming in from the YouTube channel. So if you aren't aware, we live stream to Twitch, of course, but we also live stream onto our YouTube channel, and that helps us from an archival purpose, but it also helps sort of with custom push notifications. With Twitch, if you subscribe, you'll get push notifications for every show, but for our YouTube channel, you'll get push notifications for us. So that's pretty cool. And Texan Raj has moved over there, so we used to see Texan Raj on Twitch, and now we see him over on YouTube, so that's pretty cool. Jesse wants to call it cuddle. He is super into it must be Cube Cuddle or EKS Cuddle. So all right, I'm coming around. I still say control, but I'm coming around. So Techie Stories has a question. Can you add multiple availability zones for node groups? And I think you kind of addressed that after, as you were explaining. So yeah, you can totally do that, but it's just, there's a trade-off. In fact, the default is to do that, multiple availability zones, one node group. But if you ever find yourself wanting to deal with state, then it might be easier for you to limit and build one node group per AZ. And watch for a blog post from Justin on that in the coming few days or maybe weeks. So He's
It's going through a few edits of
Exactly.
the other information, because there's a lot to consider. As soon as you have state and containers with Kubernetes, you want to make sure you address it properly for all the use cases. So
Yeah, exactly. Stitchy E asks, so worker nodes AMI is the rocket image? And I actually, that kind of was my second question when you had that file open, because you said you specified the family was Bottlerocket, but then you also specified the AMI ID. And I was wondering, if you left out the AMI ID, would it go look up the current AMI ID for you based on the family?
yes, there is a way to have it get that information, pull the latest one. I'm actually using an older one here so that I can show upgrades, which is
Perfect.
one of the purposes of it. But you can, the main difference there, actually, let me switch here. Am I here? Yeah. So the main thing here with the family, wherever that went, here is it needs to know what type of user data it can use. And so
Nice.
typically my user data wouldn't necessarily ask for like SSH key and allow it, and then I have a public key name. Public key name or key name is something that's part of a traditional Amazon Linux 2 Linux distribution, but there are other things like this enable admin container. Like that's not something you're going to get in a normal Linux distro. So there's a couple of things that EKS control just needs to know how to parse some of this information when it sends it into the CloudFormation to send it to the worker nodes properly.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Ahmed, hey, back to you. And Gato Libre says, what a coincidence. I was studying about containers yesterday and this stream came up. Good timing. Good afternoon from Brazil. Yeah. That's awesome. Hey from California. We're all in California.
We're all in California right now.
Holy crap, that's awesome. I'm normally in Texas, so I'm not used to thinking about it in these terms. By the way, go ahead.
I was going to say, this talk is a little less about containers specifically and more about the operating system. We're going to go into a little more details around like Linux and how Linux is set up here inside of Bottlerockets. And it's not going to be like a 101 Docker. I mean, if you want that, you can definitely check out the other streams. So
exactly. And I was going to suggest, if you are exploring containers, check out containersfromthecouch.com. It has our entire archive of videos. You can watch them from there. Or you can link out to YouTube and add them to your own playlist or download them or whatever it is that you need to do. There's some beginner stuff. There's some advanced stuff. There's some in between. We talk about orchestration. We talk about ECS, EKS, Fargate. We talk about Justin did an amazing talk on how Docker images work and how layering works and stuff like that. So there's just all kinds of good information out there, completely free, no advertising or anything like that. So definitely take advantage of that. So cool. Techie Stories was just for clarification. So it's basically, a storage decision. And I think no, not necessarily storage, but that's probably the most common example. There's a lot of ways that you can fine tune things at AWS to be availability zone specific. And once you reach that level, like for example, you might have an Elasticsearch cluster where you've sharded all of your data so that copies of the same data exist across all of your availability zones. So the next optimization might be for clients in AZ1 to try and send their queries into an Elasticsearch node in AZ1 to keep that inside the same AZ. So there's all kinds of stuff like that once you really start to optimize and fine tune, you can get down to be that specific. And this is just one of the tools along the way that will help you with that, help you place your pods in the right AZ so that they can have access to the data in that AZ, and et cetera.
And Justin, could you go back to the config, EKS cuddle config really quick? I just wanted to also, and I don't know if you mentioned this, sorry, but specifically with the admin container. So I think it's, just a question your way is admin access, SSH access enabled in Bottlerocket by default?
No, it's off by default. It's also updates. Automatic updates are off by default. Admin containers off by default. There's a lot of decisions for what the default experience would be for a user. An admin container, it's unknown for a lot of people. Like, what does that mean? And we'll show it in just a little bit. But basically, like, that's how you get actual root access to the host. There is a control container, which is enabled by default and allows you to do a lot of other things. But that's really just like the way you think about an OS in Bottlerocket sense is it's not a bunch of files on disk, it's an API. And how you're going to control it and change those settings and do things isn't from writing files on disk. The root file system in Bottlerocket is read-only. Like, you can't change that unless you're using the tooling and API to do some of those things. And so control container lets you do some of that stuff. Admin container lets you do some other, like deeper tuning. And I'll show that in just a second.
And it does sound like Texan Raj has just posed a challenge for me because I do love the CDK. So I'm going, yes, now I'm going to do this. So the question was, do we have a CDK stack for deploying this on EKS with Bottlerocket? I don't believe we have any CDK examples that I'm aware of, but who knows? There may be something out there.
Yeah, I mean, it did just launch yesterday. So
yeah, fair.
We're gonna work on that, and we're gonna have a show on it.
Yeah,
I don't know when, but probably pretty soon.
But yeah. I'm also going to I'm going to run this in the background as well. The EKS, EKS cluster is going to create. It's fine. We'll get to that eventually. Bottlerocket local deployment is being worked on. There is nothing specific about Bottlerocket in Amazon right now. There are some things that are specific on how it gets configured. So things like user data is the only way to configure it. And so if you want to create something with Bottlerocket or modify it or enable the admin container, that kind of stuff, you need some way to be able to send metadata to it. And AWS gives that for you. We have a metadata endpoint that every instance gets. But right now, running it locally isn't supported, mainly because of some of those other things. And I'll even show, here's just a command I'm going to use. I think it's the same ID, but I don't remember for sure. I'm going to use the same, the same IAM credentials. And then I have this file, which I really think of like Bottlerocket's kind of like the new hipster CoreOS in a lot of ways. Like there's 100%. TOML, there's Rust, there's, it's all these things that we just like, well, we used to use, YAML files. Like, no, now it's TOML. So it's way cooler. But basically, I'm just going to give it like a name tag. I'm going to add my same SSH key so that I can get into the SSH admin container. And let me actually show. This is all my user data. Is I just say I want to enable my admin container, and then I enable my my control container, which is enabled by default, but I'm being explicit here. So.
And what is the purpose of running this instance?
I'm just going to show you some of the fundamentals of the OS real quick. And so this is a pretty quick one to stand up. EKS takes a little bit longer, so I want to just get to this piece. And I actually this is somewhat where I want to show like where we kind of came from with like container OSs and like how people ran things in production. And to me, like, again, I thought of this yesterday. It was like, here's a Tupperware, which is now partially see-through. But basically, this is like my VM, right? Like everyone had a VM and they say, hey, I had these VMs everywhere, EC2 instances. And what did you do? You took systemd and you just like ran systemd or initv or whatever, and you just put stuff in it. And for me, like systemd is this catch-all of every service, right? Like everything you run on the OS is running a systemd. And so I kind of think of it as mixed nuts. Like it's just like, it's straight up like just anything you want to run systemd, you're just like, okay, we're gonna here's our services, we're gonna run those, and then what do you do, right? Like you're like, hey, this Kubernetes thing's coming out, like I gotta do something else. So like you're gonna throw Docker in it, right? And again, I'm stealing toys from my kids, but it's for a good purpose. So just like here, Docker in it, boom, like we have a container instance, right? And like that's how like everyone has been doing it for so long with general purpose Linux distros. And you say, hey, what can go wrong here, right? Like once I'm at this point, like what do you do? Right, Kubernetes, run some pods, and you're just like run all the pods I need, and we're running Kubernetes in production now, right? Like this is my Linux distro, everything's there, and so this is like my analogy of like how it's been done for all, since Kubernetes came out, and even before then, like CoreOS had some niceties because like systemd was a little bit stripped down. There wasn't a package manager, so again, you're not writing files to disk, but at the end of the day, like you still have this thing running with systemd and Docker, and so the wheels.
Your wife is going to be so mad.
My son actually, I told my son I needed props. I was like, I need some of your. We had a little Docker stuffed animal, and I don't know what happened to it, but he's like, I got this one. He's like, technically, Dad, this isn't a whale, it's a dolphin, and I'm like. I appreciate the clarity. All these technicalities are great. Like it's gonna be okay. And then he brought me like a narwhal and like an octopus. I'm like, no, like the whale's fine. I mean the dolphin. I'm sorry. But that's like how we used to run things. And so let's switch back to the terminal, and I'll show you. So Kubernetes is still standing up down here. I have this instance. Actually, I'll go a little bigger. So, and you saw I enabled the admin container. So that's already going to be there. Let me just get the IP address of this guy. Or girl. I don't know the gender of this VM. It's okay.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And the props are a big hit, obviously.
Absolutely.
Just wait, there's more. We got to explain this in full clarity for everyone. So, okay. So what I need to do is SSH. I have a Bottlerocket.
And was that a cereal container? Like, what kind of container was that? It was like really oddly shaped. Like you can't put your leftovers from dinner in there.
Don't worry, it's a C4X. Actually, no. Before I SSH to this, let's not do that. So watch. I'm going to do SSM. This is again, it's a session manager. It's command line SSM session. It's a command line tool that's Disney Streaming put out, open source, so you can use it. And like I get the instance name, and then we just do I and say okay. What?
Oh, that's the AMI.
That's it. You're SSHing into an AMI.
You're right. That doesn't work.
So everybody knows if you're new, if you're new to AWS,
it doesn't work that way. You got to run it.
SSH into an AMI.
Okay. So here I actually, session manager got into this container running on this host. And so session manager is in Bottlerocket. It's like thinking of here's my Bottlerocket instance. Like where am I at this point? Like I'm not actually in the systemd area. I have this SSM container that runs on top, and I'm inside that container right now. So like I can't get systemd. I can't get out of that. Like I am in a shell in that container, and so I have very limited things of what I can do. And they give you some help here, like enable admin container would allow me to have that, but I can't get from where I'm at from this current container into the admin container. I have to actually go out and SSH in. But inside of this container, we can see like they give us super helpful like. API client is a current, let's look at these settings of this API on how we configure the OS. And I can't even, there's no JQ on here. Like I can't, like it's so minimal that like there's a lot of things that I can't do. You can customize it, and I'll show that as long as we have time. You can customize both these containers, but this is just a basic, like here's my message of the day. Here's some Kubernetes settings I have about it. There's a bunch of stuff in here. Lock. Here's my admin container. Here's the source for it. So we can see that like that's where my admin container is running because I set that in user data, and it pulled from this ECR repo. So again, like there's so little I can do. I can see like who I am. There is again, I'm in a container, but if I do top, not there, htop, I don't think htop's here.
What about
yes.
Sudo's not even there. So like there's I could like proc. Let's like okay, how many? I'm in a container, so there's 6 processes running. Like I can't even like there's nothing I can get to from here from this container, but I can configure the OS. I could set things if I didn't do it in the user data. So it's fascinating, but I can't show you a lot here, so let's exit out of that.
Well, so really quick, Justin. So I guess from someone that's what if I'm going into the control container, what is my intention? Why would I go to that container?
probably configure something on the fly, and you're going to say, I need to change this to see how it works. I need to change this setting. The API is documented on the Bottlerocket site, so you can say, okay, API clients, like, let me write some things. You can write to settings and force a, it basically works. I think of it like SQL, where you write a bunch of commands and then you commit that and you say, hey, I need to do a bunch of stuff, and then I'm going to save this and see what worked. And then you can take that and go back to your user data and configure all your other instances to be identical. And so API client lets you do some of that stuff inside that control container. But it really is just configuring the OS. If you're doing troubleshooting or tuning, you're not going to have enough access from there to be able to do something else. And that's where the admin container was kind of created and works.
Nice.
Very good. Thanks for that.
So I need to get back to that IP. Rocket. And it's funny because, again, this admin container is another container inside my VM. This one, though, has escape hatches, I would almost say. Like it has ways for me to get to the host and do more things. So one of the things by default is I'm on the host process namespace, which just means I can see all the processes from the host I can see in this container. But again, I don't have a whole lot of tools to do it with. Justin mentions you can change settings on the fly without connecting to the console, which is, Session Manager. Systems Manager isn't just for starting sessions. That System Manager manages systems in a lot of different ways. So that integration inside of AWS is super tight to say, like, hey, Systems Manager, run these commands or configure these things without, I don't need an interactive shell to do that. Very good point.
Right. You could do it across a fleet of nodes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, again, this SSH gives me some information, so I can see, like, hey, I actually have the root file system here. So if I look in proc, there's some processes. Actually, I'm in the host namespace. So, but that should look the same as Bottlerocket root fs proc. It's going to be actually the same thing for process namespace. But if I look at where I am and then look at root fs, there are some other things that this is the actual host file system. So I'm in a small admin container, so I don't have things like htop or ps, but this admin container has some things that allow me to do, like sudo is here. And so I can sudo yum, and this is Amazon Linux too. So it should be very familiar. PS tools or PS misc, or let's just do htop. Htop. Let's get all those tools. I don't remember which one. PS utils, that's what it's called.
Yeah. And let's just clarify, you're yum installing, but this, again, is not yum installing onto the host OS.
Yes. Correct. It's in this container, and so everything is contained. So if I even destroy this, container, like, the files go away. But I do have that access of, like, what is on the host. I can see some processes. So one of the commands I like is ps tree. Mm-hmm. Which will show me all the processes, a process tree from the host all the way to myself. And so you can see where I'm at, right? Like, here's my ps tree command. And so I'm on bash right now, and I SSH in. I forget why SSH has so many forks. But it does. And then I have this container dshim, which is actually where this spawned from. Container D is a shim that ran the container that I'm actually exec into. And then before, I was in this Amazon SSM agent, which would have spawned, you would have saw like a bash after it, but you can see it has its own container. They're two separate things inside of my VM that they don't talk to each other. They're controlled by one root tree from systemd, but I can't get from one to the other. And I can see things like from the host, again, I can see kubelet was there. I can see the journal running for logging, and this is Wicked is a networking. Cronny is for time syncing, and API server. There's my API server to configure the host. These are all running on the host namespace. But I still, like, there's some things that I can't do. Like if I do journal, like I can't journals like, hey, I don't know where it's at because I'm in a container, but I do have access to the file system of the host, so I can journal. Let's give it the full path to where our log oops, sudo. And now I can see the actual logs from the host there that I mounted in that path. And this lets me see it. There's a much easier way to do it though. Shell T, there it is. This is actually, I like showing it because it's clever. It's just a bash script with a few lines in it. It basically says, hey, find my parent process and let me go to that process. Let me exec replaces my current process and nsenter goes into that container. So it's basically let me go up a level. And this container, the admin container was set up properly to let me do that. But this magic of what is shell T, it just lets me go up a process in the process tree to get to the actual host and start a shell there. Nice. But again, there's a lot of stuff that's not in the host. And so again, who am I? I'm root, but I don't have htop. I can't, there's no package manager on the host OS. I have to do those things inside the admin container. It's just a matter of security. It's a great way to keep this as streamlined and small as possible.
There's also no compiler, and I think no libraries. Is that right? Everything's statically compiled?
Yeah.
To help support, again, a stronger security profile. Techie Stories asks, could it be possible to randomize the admin container like a diode? And Justin's answer is you can customize it. In other words, point it to a different repo, but a random container isn't a feature request we've had yet. And I know you were talking about the possibility of customizing your admin container also.
Yeah, let me show that process real fast. Actually, I don't know if I have it. I did want to show it just because it has a really cool thing in it that we talked about last time with Docker. Where am I? I'm back on. Whoops. I'm back on my host. I'm going to get the admin container is open source. Oh, I'm not showing my full screen. But on GitHub, Bottlerocket OS, there's a Bottlerocket admin container. There's also a control container, and so you can actually go and customize these containers. So if I go here and I just find my Docker file, this is a good example. I love this example of multi froms in a Docker file. Not multi layers. What's it called? I'm blanking on the name.
Multi-stage.
Multi-stage. That's it. But also the amazing ability of Docker build kit to show you the outputs of how that actually looks. So where's my last from in here? There's my last from. My last from is Amazon Linux 2. And so if I go in here, you can see what it actually does in the container that I was in. This is all the steps that were in that container. But what if I actually want to, so I get OpenSSH server, sudo, and util Linux. But I also want to add htop, and I want ps, what do we call it? PS misc? Or PS
no,
utils?
Utils.
Yeah, so I want those two packages for the next time I run this container. So I can, as you can see, I have Docker build kit is set to 1. So if I Docker builds admin, oh no. Did I mess that up?
We're doing it live, folks.
It's amazing.
Oh, you know what? You know what it was? I need to set that variable. Hold on. There's a make target for it. That's what it was.
Docker Arch? No.
This builds? Yeah. Okay. So Docker builds, and that sends my flag properly. So I can make builds. And I do have the, so you'll see this multi-stage builds is actually going to do two things at once. You'll see two screens start scrolling because it can take both layers and if they don't depend on each other, work on them independently, which I think is just a great way to show that. If you're doing yum installs on 2 different layers or 2 different stages, it'll continue until it has a dependency and then it stops. the other one finishes, and then it actually like executes the rest.
That's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I forget how long this. I want to say it took like 2.5 minutes. So we don't actually have to show the entire thing, but you can see like, here's my htop ps utils. That's running. And yeah, look, I don't think that time wise, this is probably not the best to show for now, but you can customize it. It goes directly in that user data. You can just say part of the enabled, you can say where it's from, and you give a URL of ECS endpoint, or not ECS, ECR endpoint, or any Docker registry endpoints where you want to pull the admin or control container from, and you can customize them.
That's awesome.
And so if you had a custom repository with credentials that you wanted to log into, are those flags you can pass in as well?
So I had an example. Let me switch over to built the same thing.
Lots of questions. And again,
Oops,
we're
click
doing
share.
this live.
That's what I forgot. I forgot to click share there. Did I get it? Yeah.
Yep.
So I had this container, which it's not going to show me, obviously. Like I built this last week or whatever. The main difference I put was I actually just threw my SSH key from GitHub keys inside the build process. I just said curl this down and put it in authorized keys, and so Bottlerocket at startup, the admin container at startup will look for the admin endpoints and pull in your keys from the metadata, because I tell it I want the Bottlerocket key. But because you can control that image for SSH, I said, hey, I don't actually need you to do that. Go ahead and just in the build process, just embed my key. And so I didn't need to specify a key at user data. You can customize it however you want. Again, it's just a standard Docker build, a standard image. The admin container just happens to run SSH. If you didn't want it to run SSH, you don't need it to. Bottlerocket has a way that, like admin is meant to have some level of access, but there is also the notion of adding custom containers where I can have my control container, I have an admin container, and I can have a completely custom antivirus or audit or whatever I want for compliance at that layer, and it will start it, and you can say, do you want it privileged or no? All these settings are available in user data, so you can do all that.
So Texan Raj asks a question: are there any issues migrating existing apps to Bottlerocket? And if so, what does one need to be aware of? I think I can answer, but I'm curious if you want to answer first.
At the end of the day, it's running containers. If your application runs a container, don't rely on, if you're not mounting host volumes into your containers, because you can do a lot of things that rely on things from the host. And if you're trying to do that, those applications aren't going to work so well. But if you need glibc, you're good to go, right? That's if you're going to exec something that needs to run on the processor and it's x86, it's going to work for, into the container.
I think the one exception I could maybe think of would be there are some, I've seen people run, like the example that I've seen was someone running a VPN server inside a container, and it needed to load a kernel module. So to be able to provide that kernel module, you depended on a certain kernel, and I think the libraries had to be in place, like kernel devel or something like that. So that sets up a dependency between the host operating system and the container. So I think that's the scenario that you'd want to watch out for. And as long as you're not doing something like that, then it should run just like it would run anywhere else, except it's going to have a lot more resources available to it because you aren't doing nearly as much at the operating system level. That's completely stripped down. Cool. So the Carrick, I don't know how to say that. Hopefully, I know that's not right. Oh yeah, maybe so. I would love if you could talk more about cache in Docker image building with BuildKit.
Yeah, BuildKit has a lot of different ways that cache works. So if you build the container without BuildKit and then build it with BuildKit, it's different caches. But there's a lot of other advanced things you can do with BuildKits with regard to caching. I believe there's even shared remote caching. So if you have a team that always builds the same images and it's local on your disk, you don't want everyone pulling down some multi-gig image, you can actually have remote caching. You can have a lot of other things that work for your team that BuildKit allows you to do that you couldn't do with a standard Docker build.
That's awesome.
Nice.
So did your EKS cluster ever come up?
No, my EKS cluster failed.
Shouldn't have asked.
I know. I just checked it, and I was just like, okay, where are we at? And I tried to hit it, and it was like, nope, it's not there. So I actually had a problem with. I ran out of NAT gateways in my cluster, and so I tried to clean them up yesterday, and I think I cleaned up too much of the VPCs, and now my cloud config is in a weird state. But I can still show, at the very least, what's in. Let's go back over here. What I wanted to show. Here's my admin container. Where's the Bottlerocket OS? So there's the update operator. So the way you update Bottlerockets is it's a partition-based update system. So you're not doing yum updates. You're running a command called updog. And there's actually a whole glossary. Bottlerockets OS glossary has a lot of different words on here, like a host container is started by this host container service in systemd, and that's how I got the admin container and those sorts of things. But there's also a lot of dog themes, such as NetDog and Pluto, and things of that nature that allow you to do more on the OS with minimal exposure to tools, and they're very focused tools. So updog is the client that actually will do upgrades on your OS. When you're on the OS, you can run updog, and it'll tell you what updates are there, and you can tell it to reboot and apply those updates, and it'll reboot the instance to install it on a different partition and come up in the new OS version.
I think my favorite in this list is the RB settings. Like,
yeah.
it's just
the naming is amazing.
I know,
yeah.
Right? Justin AWS mentions Bottlerocket does have a way of building kernel modules, and some of our partners do that today to enable some of their deep monitoring tools. So, and then of course, L Duder says no love for cats. I don't know. Maybe in the next operating system that we release, who knows?
I don't think it's exclusionary. I just think that in this case, Bottlerocket chose the dog theme, and you have to stick with your theme. I mean, once you name it one way, although I don't know how Bottlerocket fits in with dogs either, but it's okay. Like they went all in on dogs for everything else, and and then past that, like, yeah, we could open up for cats on a different OS for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, look, Amazon. There's a lot of dogs at Amazon. Let's be real.
Pages. Yep.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, going through it, any of our offices, there's dogs. And maybe this team just had more dogs than most other teams. That's possible. They just fancy the dogs.
So the last piece I was hoping to show off in the EKS cluster, but we'll just have to do it another time, was the actual how you do updates if you have a node group of all different Bottlerocket instances. Because you have updog that switches A to B partitions, it's a lot easier to say, like, hey, what version are you on? You're on this version. You're on version 2, and someone else is on version 1.9. And it's not a difference of like files on disk. It's actually like which partition did you boot to? And I can check that with the hashes and everything else, because a traditional Amazon Linux 2, I can say, hey, what version are you? But that means nothing, because what I yum installed and what I configured and everything else I layered on top changes what that OS version means. And so inside of Bottlerocket, it is one version to another, and you can guarantee that the base OS, base file system, is a specific thing.
Yeah, and just more context around the dogs.
Yeah, 6,000. Goodness.
Wow. So if we control an OS with partition flipping, we can also expose that into Kubernetes as a way to operate on that and say, hey, I want to change this entire node group to the next version of Bottlerockets. And Kubernetes can run a pod that has privileges to be able to run updog and do these things. And so this is the operator code that actually does that, but there's also a great walkthrough down here of getting started, where it actually deploying the operator and then setting some tags or some labels on the instances to say which operator it should use and that sort of stuff. And then there's even really nice, like, there's a make target that says like make git node status, which will show you all of your Bottlerocket instances in the cluster. And as they upgrade, it uses the Kubernetes API or etcd behind the covers as a state lock. So the operator will say, hey, if everything had an update and we just said, okay, everyone update now, like, what's going to happen, right? Like everything's just going to go away. Like, well, my cluster's down because I'm doing updates right now, right? So like that's not going to work. And so Bottlerocket does, it's very, again, very similar to CoreOS. CoreOS, etcd was created specifically for this. etcd was created because they wanted consensus in the cluster and said, hey, I only want one instance to go down at a time, do an upgrade. When it's back up and healthy, the next one should go down. And never before that. If it comes up and it's not healthy, stop. Don't do updates. It's not safe. Let's figure that out. And CoreOS also had a lot of really cool features for like, you could set windows for like time of like when you want it. The lockd service is like, I want this many or this percentage of my instances should shut down at once. They should do it during this time. Get my updates from this server. All of that stuff was configurable. And Updog is doing a lot of same ways in a Kubernetes native way. And so we can say, hey, let's use that Kubernetes API, etcd behind it. And so we can actually walk through each instance. It'll get a set of labels on it and say, hey, I need an update. Is it safe for me to reboot or not? And the operator will say, yes, go ahead and update, or no, someone else is doing it, or you just need to wait, or your update's failed or whatever. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can do once you expose that API and once you work in a more, it's not ephemeral, much more deterministic states. And we say, hey, I know the state of the world right now, and we can now act on that because it's not imperative, and it's not me like saying this step, this step, this step. Oh, I failed on step 2. I need to go back up 1. It's just, hey, no. What's your version? Okay, the cluster is at this version, and I know when I need to do updates or not.
So cool. This is so advanced. But at the same time, it simplifies so many things. You just stop managing the host operating system and instead replace it with the next version.
Well, and you look back, like, again, I mean, I didn't even get to use all my props, but like you go back to this state of where's my, I got systemd, I got my Docker here, and then there's like, what did you used to do with config management? Like next thing you do is you're like, well, let me throw a bunch of config files on here. And now let me like try to figure out like what state is the world. And you're like, looking at Chef or Puppet and saying, I don't know what's actually happening. If the run was successful, I assume this is my end state. And so I can tie that back to a config management point. But like once you start layering in all your pods and you're saying, oh, like I have this weird error on that one instance and I don't know why. A lot of times, you just throw it away and another one will get replaced if it's in an auto-scaling group. But this is like the state of the world of where we were at. And even like, it's interesting with Bottlerocket inside of the Kubernetes instance, Docker's not there. If you notice, like those were all containerd. I wasn't running a Docker daemon. I didn't have Docker running because that can cause other problems. So like in the case of let's make Bottlerocket work for ECS. ECS is tied to Docker. So that's where I'm going to say, okay, well, like I need ECS for this, but my host container is still over here on containerd. And so I have the Docker daemon that can run with ECS, and ECS can control which services get put there. But again, like ECS doesn't run pods, right? So I'm going to have like a different abstraction for what is like my ECS. And you did this to me during lunch too. Like this is all like, so like for me, like I think of ECS as like, these are donut holes. And like, here's my like ECS services. But like, if you're running Bottlerocket with ECS, like it's a different, it looks different because I need Docker and I have these services that don't have pods. And so you still have a little bit of systemd down there to kind of orchestrate some of this. But if systemd went away, like you don't actually care. The API is what you care about. And being able to interface with it at that point. And like the only thing you really care about is, these can like make sure you don't eat the Tide Pods, eat the.
Yeah.
I was actually just going to say, did you put Tide Pods in there or was that just pretend? Because I was going to say, don't eat anything that the
I did.
Pods touch.
We're in ECS right now. We're not running Kubernetes. It's okay. Like I can eat the pod.
But earlier, I'm just concerned. I'm just concerned for your health here. Okay.
So that's kind of the state of like, you can mix those things. And Bottlerocket is coming out with flavors, right? We can have different versions. They're working on an ECS version, so you can run Bottlerocket in ECS. You can have a lot of the same control planes of how ECS is going to upgrade your instances and how Kubernetes. And so like that interface of you to the OS isn't about files on disk. It's about the API. It's about how you control it. And it gives a lot more clarity and control at a higher level. So I'm not over there running systemd commands or, these like low level, like IO-ectal, like I'm not doing that layer. You might need to configure things. We have, as Justin pointed out, like there are ways to get kernel modules and things like that to make this possible to configure it. But in runtime at day 2 operations for the platform, you don't want to be that low level. You want to care about the donut holes on top. And then everything else is like, that's where your money maker is, right? Like I don't make money on mixed nuts. I make money on donut holes. And so that's, these are really good now too. Like I didn't eat enough. And so I'm just going to keep going. So if there are questions.
That's right. You're going to have to eat past the Tide Pods to get to the mixed nuts. All right.
Pretty fantastic.
Last call. Oh, what? No one said tech peeps are boring, surely.
No, we're just hungry.
Exactly. All right, last call for questions. And let's just wrap up real quick what we've looked at while we're waiting on any last questions to come in. We took a look at Bottlerocket OS. It is a new operating system built to run containers. It's starting off as something that you run in AWS, but ultimately the goal is to have it possibly run anywhere. It's completely open source, so if you want to work on this, you can find it on GitHub, and you can open pull requests, open issues. You can talk directly with the engineering team over GitHub issues about what you'd like to see in the future, or what behaviors you're seeing now that you think maybe aren't quite right, or something like that. So definitely check it out. Start using it. Start working on it, and start communicating back with us about what you find, because we would love to see your feedback and hear your feedback on it. So thank you, Justin, for giving us a tour of Bottlerocket. That was pretty incredible. And as usual, your props are amazing.
Nice.
I just wonder about tomorrow's session, what props you have in store.
I don't know. Like ACK is going to be a difficult one. I mean, ACK, or I don't know. Like,
right.
We'll figure it out.
So for tomorrow, we're going to take a look at ACK, unofficially called ACK, and we're going to, I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to do things. So tune in tomorrow, and let's figure out what to call it for real.
AWS controller for Kubernetes, by the way, right? Oh, so just for those who don't know what ACK or ACK is, we love acronyms, but there's nothing worse than when you talk acronyms and people don't understand what they are. So
good point.
Just thought I'd share.
All right, Justin, toss me a donut.
This whale has a bunch of glaze on it now.
You're gonna have to use one of those Tide Pods on it.
No, don't do that.
Don't mix ECS and Kubernetes. What's going on here?
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.